So, welcome to Keen on Yoga for the second time, Magnus. It's lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Magnus is the yes. I mean, it's kind of. I never. Teresa says I never give enough time for people to reply. I'm just straight in with the introduction. But I was going to say Magnus has written a fantastic book. If you haven't read it already, The Art of Stillness in a Noisy World. I never get the full title after. I know it was The Art of Stillness, but The Art of Stillness in a Noisy World. It's a really good book.
Thank you very much.
And it's practical and it's practical and but it's also got depth to it. I don't usually read these kind of books that are, more of a practical book. I'm pretentious scholar, but I really enjoyed it. I remember a number of the imageries of the washing up in the summer home and kind of things, and I really like the book. So I recommend it to everyone that's watching. And today, Magnus and I are going to talk again a little bit about meditation. Because we hear this word all the time, meditation. Oh, you've got to meditate, or even if you're a yoga practitioner, well, yoga is only really a precursor to meditation. Or if you're not doing a meditation practice, you're not really doing yoga. But what does this really mean, right? So Magnus has been involved for many years in Tibetan Buddhism. He's Tibetan language scholar. He knows the language. He's been invested in with some of the very foremost teachers of Tibetan Buddhism, so he definitely knows his stuff. And but on the other hand, I suppose a proviso here that Magnus is coming from, mainly you would say, from that Tibetan Buddhist perspective, right?
Yeah.
So the answers that Magnus will give today probably will be, from a specific strain of Buddhism, which is the Mahayana or Vajrayana Tibetan Buddhism. But nevertheless, they're generalized as well. So it's not just like they just relate to if you want to be a Tibetan Buddhist. But nevertheless, Magnus does have this particular background. So it's worth pointing out. And for anyone that's interested in Tibetan Buddhism, it's a wonderful and colorful and complex kind of set of practices. But just to kick off, Magnus, on a more general level, what can we expect from meditation? Because people talk about it like it's some panacea, but what actually does it do?
That's a good question, and I would also just adding to that because I think it can be supportive to some yoga practitioners, that actually what I did was that I was introduced to we talk more about that in our first podcast. I was introduced to Tibetan Buddhism as a teenager because of my family's engagement in sponsoring Tibetan child in India, Nepal. And then I started Ashtanga Yoga, a 6-day practice, at the age of 37. So I already had studied meditation for decades. And then I started with a physical practice, which was I think it's just interesting to say that I've been involved in both. So, but my perspective comes from the other way around. You say that we normally do the asanas to prepare ourselves for meditation, but I went the other way around, so to speak. So I started with what we're...
Just to mention, though, that isn't it the same with Tibetan Buddhism, though? You only do the yoga right at the end.
Exactly.
You do all the practices, and then you do the yoga kind of as a finishing kind of thing.
Yes, or meanwhile, right? But it's a bit of a hidden practice. Right. At least I wasn't introduced very much. Of course, you're introduced to the prostrations, which is a act of devotion where you use the body, meanwhile reciting mantras. Reciting mantras. So there are some physical, but actually I missed that part because of my body felt weaker and weaker because you sit so much. So when I came to Ashtanga Yoga, I felt such a relief to strengthen my body. And again, I felt my elongated spine and all those things, which was really nice. So, but at least just to give a picture where I'm coming from when I talk about things. So, what can we expect out of meditation? I think we can expect very direct benefits. That you will get the feeling that you become more calm abided, that you feel calm in your mind, and you will have a space in between stimuli and response. So instead of that you're employed or a slave under your wandering thoughts and emotions, you will feel like now you have an option to don't follow. Something is happening. Stimuli, it can be an outer stimuli, of course, but I think our worst enemies, after all, is more the inner stimuli of thoughts and emotions and old patterns of loops of thinking. And in the state of meditation, quite early on, you will get the glimpse that, okay, there is something in my mind watching the rest of the mind, and you can identify when things arise and how they take form, and that you have the option to stick to it or either leave it. And if you leave it, it will have the same structure as everything that exists. It will take full form and it will change, and after some time disappear. So that's the first thing, and when you experience that, you will get a relief from I am not my thoughts, I am not my emotions, I am not the sensations in my body. Of course, it's part of you, but you can change the stakes so that you become the boss and not the employee of the thoughts, and that's a very nice feeling. And of course, then I can make the list long, but nowadays people know that you will strengthen your focus, your ability, your muscle of attention, and you will change your perspective. So that is not, we all know that from research projects conducted. And if we look at the word, you mentioned I was interested in language. We have two words that are interesting. It's tingitsin in Tibetan. It's a word you use for samadhi, meditation. And actually it means sin is something that holds. You hold on to something. And tingitsin is you hold something firmly. You hold it unwaveringly. Unwaveringly, you say that? Yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
You hold something unwaveringly without equanimity. So you don't leave it anyhow, even if it's good influences or bad influences coming, you still hold on to a specific object. And then the other word is gom, which means habituate, become familiar. So you make your mind familiar with this new way of relating to things, that you can hold on to something for as long as you want to and don't get lost in mind wandering. And when you have habituated for some time, when you have trained the formal meditation, this will be a new way of being, so to speak. It becomes more you. So that is, but that in the beginning you will only experience that meanwhile you're doing the meditation. But after some time, you will see that, this happens also in real life situations, off the mat, so to speak, and that is very interesting.
So in terms of techniques, what are we exactly trying to do? Because you often hear this kind of like non-attachment, so you're kind of like creating, as you mentioned, creating space, and you don't, kind of space between a thought and a reaction, and seeing things out there. I mean, they're very generalized kind of methods when they're talked about. I mean, can you give any more specifics as to when we're sitting down, how to do this, how to get this sense of transientry of thoughts and non-clean to thoughts?
Yes, I think we all have to start with. And again, I mentioned this from a Tibetan Buddhist perspective, but we have to start with some kind of stabilizing practice. So we call it shamatha in Buddhism, or shine in Tibetan, shamatha. And it can be as simple as you use an external object that you keep your mind steady on. And I think if I teach new beginners in shamatha meditation, I would use maybe hearing to listen to sounds as a first external object. You can listen to sounds at distance, that you can listen to sounds, more subtle sounds, and you can learn that experience that actually you have the ability to move this attention from one point to another, and you can do this by intention, not by random. And also you learn the concept of mindfulness that we use two components. We use attention, but we also use peripheral awareness. And I think this is very important to understand. And I would describe it that two different ways of knowing something or experience something that the mind have the ability to. Because take, for example, now we are talking, but I'm quite sure that you have a peripheral awareness, knowing that there are sounds in your room, and if somebody would come in and call your name, like that sound we heard now, you will notice that. A part of your mind will notice that. It's like you're standing in a queue. You can see people in the at the coffee shop. They're standing in the queue, in the line, and they watch down in their cell phone. But they won't miss out when it's their turn, Their intention, they just know that,
yeah, exactly.
one cup, I want a cup of coffee. So this is a peripheral awareness. And this is very useful when you practice stabilizing meditation, because then you understand that you're not supposed to shut down, and you're not supposed to see thoughts as enemies. You have to block them. It will give you a total different view, and you will understand that the attention is quite relaxed. So this peripheral awareness can take like 20-30% of the meditation. So meditating on sounds and meditating on the breath, of course. But we have to do something that stabilizes our mind.
Well, sounds is a new one, and it sounds like that the sound might be distracting, or it could easily be distracting, isn't it, if it's not done very carefully. Listening to the sounds outside doesn't sound like it's focusing. It almost sounds like the opposite. And as you mentioned, this kind of peripheral awareness seems to be expanding awareness outwards rather than, in a way, focusing awareness inwards. So it's quite a different way of using the mind, where you're not holding it so tight and kind of trying. Often kind of feel that the way that people take Patanjali and the kind of yoga meditation that we find in Yoga Sutras is try and hold the mind as tight as you can and just stop anything coming in, and like you would extinguish a flame. That kind of cause the mind to go into a vacuum, so nothing is happening at all, and mind, the idea that the mind is ceasing, that the fluctuations of the mind are ceasing. But what you're describing is a much looser kind of more fluid way of meditating, where you're not actually trying to hold or stop the mind. You're just trying to kind of observe it's what it's doing.
Yes,
in a way.
Exactly. It's like if you see your mind as a room, and this faculty of the mind that's observing is sitting very relaxed, like a chair, and very content, and not looking back, not looking for any thing to happen, specific to happen. And it's like doors in this room. It's like the 5 aggregates is one door for each sense, and things are coming in. You can feel senses, you can feel temperature, you can feel everything is there, thoughts and emotions, and you just sit still, and it's like you recognize, you're so aware, you're so alert. So the alertness is very important component. So immediately when something is coming in, you see it, and instead of try to push it out again, you can say, welcome, welcome stress, welcome worries, welcome anxiety. I see you. It's okay, but I have no interest at this moment to associate or interfere with you, because I have a different task going on here now. So you can be very, very clear, and it almost sounds silly when I explain it. But this will disarm, and this will keep the space, a healthy space in between. And you will also understand that they are not a part of you, because when you feel like depression or something like that, you're over-soaked with one emotion, and this will give you a very healthy distance. For me, this was I think this was the absolute best thing I experienced when I was young, when I started meditation, because I later on I'm diagnosed with ADHD, and I didn't know that.
Okay.
I didn't know that at that time. But for me, that was such a relief, because all those things that I was struggling with, I thought it was me. You know, it was 100% identification. And I remember I told myself, "Oh, is this how it's gonna be? I don't know. This will be a hard one." so
But I think, yeah, I mean, it definitely reminds me of in the previous podcast, which everyone, I should have mentioned before, should listen to it. It's a great episode where Magnus talks about his childhood and this unique experience that you had with your family adopting a Tibetan refugee who ends up kind of being your gateway into this kind of whole new world of meditation.
Not adopting, but they were sponsoring him, and he was very close to us, like a godson. And I was titled him brother when I was a kid, like that. Yeah.
Wrong words. Because he came to visit you, but he was also he was living in India, so it was But yes, I mean, we also talk about, my involvement in Tibetan Buddhism. It really reminded me that, the way that you talk about mind is that expansive quality of Buddhism, and particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, the idea of the expansiveness of the mind, rather than sometimes what I feel with other strains of meditation, this attempt to kind of close down an experience, right? A kind of denying of experience, worldly experience or thoughts are wrong, and what we're trying to do is kind of get into a box and keep everything out, whereas this Tibetan Buddhism really opens up to say, well, there's nothing wrong with all this. It's just it's the way of dealing with this, and it's the way of holding it in such a manner that it's with such a lightheartedness as Tibetan Tulkus, Rinpoches, etc. do have that lightheartedness with the whole thing, which we Westerners seem to lack. And it also reminded me of the the Milarepa story, where he comes back to his cave and he finds all the demons in the cave, and they're all mucking around, and he doesn't know what to do, and then in the end he kind of makes them food, and then they, that's the only way they kind of all disappear suddenly, right? Because you can't battle these things, so you just have to embrace them in a way.
Exactly.
I think that's
a brilliant example. A brilliant example. And what you and when I hear you explain this, that you try to box in meditation. For me, it sounds more like a civil war. you will never win. You will never win, because life will come to you sooner or later. Suffering is a part of life. So what can you do? You can't. I read a very nice metaphor. I think it was Pakchok Rinpoche, a Tibetan teacher. He said something like imagine your mind as a small room, like this box you're explaining. If you have a very small room and you put one bed in the room, it will be a bedroom. If you put a desk, it will be an office. So one thing will define the whole mind, but imagine instead the spacious mind that I describe in meditation, the big room. You can put many different furniture there, but not one thing will define the room. So it's no problem. It's no problem to have thoughts and emotions. It's parts of life. I have a lot of emotions.
And you can also shift between them.
Exactly. You become flexible, mental, psychological, flexible. That's different.
I think one Tibetan teacher, one Rinpoche, said to me that mind is they often compare the mind to the sky. This is a metaphor you hear a lot, in particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, that mind is like sky, expansiveness and infinite sky. And I remember him saying the problem is actually that you can't take the expansiveness, right? That it's there. The expansiveness is there in your mind, but it's too bright and you don't want to see it. You can't take the degree of brightness that it is. You're not ready to experience.
Oh, yes. Yes. That's nice. And whether that bright sky is obscured by a dark sun or a bright sun, it doesn't matter. So you have to deal with obscurations anyhow.
So to speak. And moving on, I wanted to ask whether it matters one's perspective on what one's doing. Does that make a difference? If I mean, Buddhism doesn't necessarily kind of posit like a kind of it's not so kind of theistic or kind of metaphysical in the kind of transcendental way that yoga is. It's I mean, do we have to have an aim for this, or can we just kind of let go with whatever comes up?
You mean like if you need a special intention for your practice?
Yes, I mean exactly. Like, are we looking for something outside life, or are we just looking to be more comfortable in this life? Is that the aim? Is that can we be a materialist and be involved in Buddhism, or do we need to be have some kind of metaphysical, some kind of transcendental aspiration, as it were? Do we need to look? Are we inherently tied into looking outside life, or we adopt meditation?
It's a very good question, I think, and I will try to cut myself short because there's so much this thing. But if I first put a hat on, which is more a secular hat, I would say any intention is good unless it doesn't hurt anyone else. I mean, nowadays you can use mindfulness and meditation for just become more focused at work, or there's nothing wrong with that. And you can use mindfulness to strengthen your relation with your partner. There's nothing wrong with that, of course. But it's not the Buddhist take on meditation. That is important to understand, because the Buddhist meditation comes from first it comes from actually the Buddha's own experience from life. He was a prince. He had everything, and his father he made like a setup that nothing can go wrong. He had many wives and all material stuff that is needed for a life, but still he felt there is some kind of dissatisfaction. And he went outside the castle, and he saw. I think they called 3 or 4 torments. Torments. Do you say torment? Yeah. He saw like an old person, and he saw a sick person, and he saw a dead person, and also he saw a sannyasi. And he understood that, but it doesn't matter. I have all this, but I'm going to become old, sick, and I'm going to die. So there is suffering in life, because as fast we understand this, we understand that this is we will lose at some point. So he was standing on one side of a river, and he wanted to get away from suffering, and to come over the river he was using Dharma, and he tried first to more be destructive, to become he got a member of the Sangha of the yogis that was doing this very hard tapas, more or less like destroying the body to get rid of suffering, but it didn't work for him. So he found the middle way. He wanted to be still in the world, to live in the world, but not be of it, so to speak. So with the Dharma teachings, he could come over the river to get rid of the how to say, the cognitive suffering. He couldn't get rid of the physical suffering. He was still going to become, as he did. He was a human being. He was nothing else. But the cognitive suffering he solved, so to speak. So what I'm saying is, Buddhist meditation is about getting rid of suffering, or to get a new relationship with the circumstances of life. That is the take of Buddhist meditation. And then, of course, if you take it even further, you can, I think there is like a line there, because if you don't believe in karma in the sense that we live, this mind has been in another body in a former life, then of course it's a matter of faith. But I can also use karma in more psychological aspects, like what we do today, tomorrow, that we will reap of that action. So you can see it from many different points, but we have to be clear about that. In many parts of Buddhism, especially in the Mahayana Buddhism, they really believe that there is this karma that's going from life to life, and it can also manifest in new bodies that you can see in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, in Dalai Lama.
Yeah. I suppose I asked to it because I think there's often this belief that you can kind of use meditation like anything else in the world to kind of solve it and make it work. But essentially with Buddhism, there's the understanding that the world, in the way that we know it, trying to get what we want out of it, and become happy in a kind of in a pleasure or excitement kind of way, can never work, And so I think it's kind of, it's still important to stress that the Buddhist understanding of meditation is to alleviate suffering, not to give oneself an extra pleasurable life, but through the understanding that essentially everyone will suffer, and that, and undoubtedly the Buddha crosses over the river to a different experience of life altogether, one which is very different to our own one, which is goal-centered and kind of accumulative, that we will accumulate enough stuff around us, whether it be, emotional stuff or physical stuff or experiences, that we will somehow be happy outside somewhere in the future, right? And basically, the Buddha realized, and the Buddhism is based on, is the fact that will never happen in the way that we assume it will. Right? So it is. I think it's important to stress here that we can use meditation to help with daily life, but essentially it is a vision which is pretty far-reaching, really, and pretty radical, in terms of how different it is to most normal, let's say, normative expressions of the meaning of life, right? Obviously it makes perfect sense. The Buddha saw these things, and then now we are just like the Buddha and the king who tried to hide them from the Buddha. Again, we're in that position ourselves. We're hiding away death from ourselves, hiding away suffering from ourselves. Hiding away that and pretending that the world in the way that we know it can work. But
that's very well put. Yes, very very good. And I think it's all about that. And I think it's also one more thing is that we have to understand, again, I say that the Buddha was just a human being, the Siddhartha Gautama was a human being. And all this happened in midst of life. It was like a turmoil for him. He left his wife and son. Of course, he was sad for that. But he felt such a longing for the truth, to understand this, and he tried so many different things, and he was almost dying because of what he was doing to his body. So opposite of many normative religious saints, he became enlightened there in that situation in life under just a normal tree, and it didn't take him to heaven or anything like that, because he kept on living on the earth. And so this is also a very interesting point, that this option to experience nirvana is now. It's now. It's not when we die. It's now. It's in our mind.
And that's a new thing as well, really relatively new, because most religions, and most Indian philosophical takes, philosophical beliefs would have it that the body being maya and the gunas being illusion, that you can only ever find it once you die, once you leave. So the idea of jivan mukti, of this life liberation is still a very refreshing thing to find in Buddhism, and I think a relatively new thing really in religions altogether. The same thing with Christianity. It was life, you're never going to be happy in life, but when you get to, you do good things in life, then you get to heaven afterwards. So it's a very alluring proposition held out here in the meditation, that you can find some resolution to enjoy in this life only. Nevertheless, the Buddha was not living the worldly life, as I mentioned, that we assume that we might still live. He was essentially dead in life, really, if we're honest. He was living as a sannyas, as a renunciate, and he wasn't indulging in the things that we would usually consider make, you know, that make a life up, right? He wasn't going out for dinners and having sex, and you know, and trying to develop his career and doing all the things that we usually think of as
he was
a
a
life.
failure after that, because when he came out as enlightened, you know, everybody didn't want to listen to him. So I don't know exactly what text that comes from, but it's described that on his first session with his to proclaim what he learned from these sessions under the tree, people said, no, this is not proper explained. So he didn't success. It didn't come immediately. So for sure, for sure, he also had some struggles to progress with his teachings, with his career.
Become more successful. But I mean, I think one thing you point out as well, though, that it wasn't through sheer tapas, through body denial and kind of, we say, like we kind of force against circumstance that he did it. It was through a middle path of kind of, you know, as you started the interview talking about acceptance and embracing rather than denial and forcing circumstances to do your own bidding, as we say. To, you know, this middle way is a very, very subtle thing, right? Would you like to talk a little bit more about that, perhaps? That, you know,
yes, I think it's that's the beauty of it. I think, because we always think that we have to go to 100% always to push something to win. Progression is always comes from that we're pushing. But I think Buddhism learned me the opposite. That to be spacious and to embrace life circumstances, it takes you to deeper layers of that center that we call I, or the ego, so to speak, and you will change perspective on things. Because the first lesson for Buddha was like, okay, I see this guy is old, this guy is sick, this guy is dying, but it won't happen to me, does it? Yes, I'm sorry. It will happen to you as well. So we have to accept life. If we don't accept life and we have to solve it, we are still in civil war. We are fighting against something. But the minute when the Buddha understood that nothing is permanent, nothing outside is impermanent, nothing inside me is permanent, and nothing inside me is permanent. That's when it changed for him. He understood that everything is changing, and I have to accept that. Don't fight against it. Then it was like when nirvana appeared for him. And I think that is very beautiful. And if we analyze that, like in a laboratory, we started now for 30 minutes. We talked now for 30 minutes. But even you and me, we're not exactly the same from when we started. Now you said many things to me that I started to analyze and think about, and I will think about them after we quit this talk. I'm not completely the same as I was before, and nothing is. If we really analyze that, everything is changing. So we have to accept that. But the problem is with the mind that we categorize things into aversion and something desire we want more of. Because immediately when we feed the ego with what lifts us up, we grasp. And immediately something coming up that we don't like. Suppose like a person come into the room that is your enemy, something like you want to take it away. So this categorization makes it difficult for us. It doesn't give you a flow. It's still like you're in the box fighting all the time.
You mentioned the ego. I mean, and people in meditation, they kind of, you know, I mean, this ego, especially these days, is it's a real hot topic, isn't it? That, you know, you also mentioned the idea with the ADHD that somehow, I think you felt somehow lacking or unworthy because you had this difficulty, right? And then with the Buddhism, it was no longer a difficulty because you didn't identify basically with it so strongly, right? So I, you know, and so yeah, it was something to do with this sense of rigid ego again, this making a definite and non-changing sense of I. That's perhaps the problem, and somehow meditation serves to expand that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about the difficulty of the ego and how to hold the ego instead of meditation? Because I don't think you're also talking about denying the sense of self either. There's still a sense of self there. It's just a different type of self than perhaps we're used to, where the self is very much, again, in the box of I like these things and I don't like these things, and trying to keep the same, which would be okay, but the world is always changing. And the ego is trying to keep the same.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And I think we say this in both yoga and meditation, that we have to get rid of the ego. But still, there's some kind of destructive behavior in that. And I don't think that can work. And I can relate to that because, and I felt in my late, when I was teenager years, I also felt like maybe I can somehow, due to some behaviors, destroy those things that are inside me. But I think that will more or less lead to psychotic states more, because you will no longer have any anchor points inside you, so you get lost. There is no lights on your path any longer. Maybe not even a path. So I think it's Dalai Lama who said, like, what you're looking for is a robust and healthy ego. So I see it's more like a distilled focus point of consciousness. And this focus point is that, like, you, with all your experiences in life, you relate to this distilled focus point somehow, and this makes up what we call the I, and it can be healthy, and it can be unhealthy. But again, the middle way, I think, is the best way. But it must be there. You must relate to something, otherwise it will be you will be psychotic. You won't be anything. It's like, I don't think that is what it is that it was after, because otherwise, if we can talk about Buddha, why did he talk about compassion and things like that? It doesn't make sense if you just erase everything. Then it's nothing. I think we talked more about interconnectedness, and that happiness comes from feeling interconnected in the bigger society. So I think we have to investigate the ego. I think we have to investigate it. For example, if you started to criticize me, maybe I would feel threatened. And I really will react with panic. But instead of letting that fire burst out, maybe in meditation you can look at it. Why did I feel threatened? What parts of me did feel threatened? What could happen if that fall apart? Is it solid, or is it built up on many components? You can start working on the mind and working on the ego. That's very different. And you will find out there is not a thing. It's not one atom that we will find deep inside that there is one thing. It's more like what do you call this? When you, I don't know the word in English, but when you have water in the park, you can see water coming up like this. Fountain. Thank you. Fountain.
You know that word. Well, you mentioned you mentioned a healthy ego. What does that mean for you? A healthy ego? Because there's still this challenging word of ego. I think for most people is still completely negative. But what you're saying is quite different. That what you need is actually a healthy ego. A healthy ego is not only thinking of your own. What do you say? That what is good for you, not me. It's a more selfish ego. It's like an ego that can be
proud. You can be proud of your family, of your kids, of your work, anything like that. But it's not like just feeding that I am the best. I want this. And you have this driving force after sometimes. The only thing that drives you is that you want something. That's an unhealthy ego. But to have a healthy ego is an ego that wants to what do you say? Participate in the world and to be supportive for other people and understand that we only exist in interconnectedness with other people. So if you want to be happy, you also want to see other people happy. Because you can't be happy if your friends are unhappy. It's very weird situations. You are interconnected. So that's a healthy ego that understands that after all, you only exist in relation to others.
Yeah.
It's a difference.
All right. On a practical level for people listening, once again, because I'm sure I've asked you this previously as well, how might we start to develop a meditation practice? I think for a lot of people this seems a rather overwhelming idea, and maybe in terms of structuring, when to do, how consistently, how often, how long for, what to focus on to start with, and how to judge it, how to judge whether we're being effective or not, whether we know we're heading in the right direction.
That's
how
a good
do we
question.
know?
Yeah, so to start, I think intention is very good. Your first question, why do we want to do this? And it can be curiosity is good enough, but most people coming to meditation, I think, are facing some kind of distraction or suffering in their lives, and they want to handle that, not get rid of, but they want to handle that thing. So it's good to just normally when I meet a beginner, I used to ask them, why do you want to learn this? Because I want to see if I'm the right person to help them, or if I can guide them to someone else. But I also want them to say it to themselves. What is my problem here? What is my thing? So after that, you have to, and nowadays it's maybe harder than ever, because to find meditation is very easy, but it's like a jungle out there. You can find on YouTube and everywhere, but you need some kind of guidance in the beginning. Yeah. It can be from a book, or it can be from guided meditations online. In the beginning, I would say that you should stop when you have your peak enthusiasm, so to speak. So, which means in the beginning that short sessions is really good. Let's say 10 minutes. Let's say, and you shouldn't quit when you feel like this is just too much. But I successed after all. But it will make your career short in the meditation business. So I think if you work with an alarm clock, and you set it on 10 minutes, and when you come to 7-8 minutes, you feel like, oh, can it be over soon? Then it means that you have to shorten the session a bit to 5 minutes. But if 10 minutes passed and you feel like, oh, wow, it felt quite easy, it's time to lengthen the time a little bit. So very general rules, yes.
Right. Yeah.
And I would start with something that is, we have this more complex analytical meditations and visualizations. I wouldn't start with that, because you have to stabilize the mind first. So, as I said,
it's kind of hilarious when you know anything about Tibetan Buddhism and you know what he's talking about in terms of the complexity of the visualizations. Like, no, you probably wouldn't start with it.
It can be quite frightening.
Oh yes, yeah.
But beautiful. Why don't meditate on sounds? If you sit in a room, try to meditate on a very clear sound in the room, maybe from a fan or something like that. And then after some time, when you identify that sound, and you can ask yourself questions, is the sound consistent, or is it dynamic? Is it high, low? Don't ask, do I like it or not? Not like that. Just to try to define the quality of the sound. Then when you define that, you move your attention to sound out in the street maybe, and more subtle sounds, and go on like that. And I say meditate on sounds is very good, because nowadays many people have a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. And some people, I realized, get a little stressed when to meditate on the breath. Because if they don't get a good introduction with some kind of breath work or pre-meditative exercises, they can almost get anxiety because of their shallow breathing.
Yeah, exactly.
But external objects like sounds is very easy to relate to, and if it won't increase the anxiety, it won't. And if it does, you can leave the sounds. You can just walk out. But if the anxiety increases in your body, you can't leave your body. So that's also a good thing to start with. But after that, you can also just follow. And I have this. I always start with this, where you can follow the inhalation and the exhalation, and then explore the gap after the exhalation, because the exhalation is the way to go if you want to become relaxed.
So yeah, I mean, as you were saying at the start, it very much sounds like, first of all, you're training the muscle of awareness.
You must.
The kind of the ability to be stronger in awareness, and then once you've got the ability to be, more focused and concentrated, then you can put your concentration on different points accordingly, to what you want to inquire about, I suppose. So first of all, you're just trying to develop that sense of circumspection.
Exactly. But there's one thing to add there that is interesting, I think. That is, we are trying to focus one-pointedly on one thing, as you say, your attention on a sound or something. Yeah. But one thing, they are very, very clear in Buddhism, that you have to focus on a positive thing, a healthy thing, and not a selfish thing. Right. Otherwise, so this makes sense. Right. If you're mindful on just making money for yourself or something like that, you can't say that I'm doing meditation, Buddhist meditation, or mindfulness meditation. You are doing something else, because if you want to take it into this spectrum, it must be something that of soft value for yourself or others. That comes from the good heart. That's very important.
Okay. I think also to qualify that this focus that you're describing is really, really subtle, because it's not like you're just trying to focus on the fan, as you mentioned, and exclude all other sounds. It's just kind of a holding of the mind to be aware of everything that's kind of going on in it, rather than just kind of like isolate. I just want to focus on this and not that, because that just takes you back into the same old dualism that we're used to in the world. I want this and I don't want that, and the constant civil war that you mentioned, which is daily life. I want to have these experiences and not these ones, and the Buddhism is just allowing all experience to be part of awareness and
be very relaxed. That's also, as you mentioned, this be very relaxed. Your face, your shoulders. Right. Don't be so hard on yourself. It's not like keep your spine elongated. It's good enough, and then just rest your body. But be alert. And don't fall asleep.
But I suppose it's very difficult, isn't it? Because people trying to achieve in meditation, just like they're trying to achieve anything else. I want to be good at meditation, or I want to get something out of the meditation. For me personally, I want to get a feeling of better. But really, this is the objective of Buddhism. And you say it's important to qualify. It's not inherently to feel better. It's just to be released from the suffering of trying in a way to constantly feel the best you can, right? And the release from the suffering of trying to isolate your experience in the world to make it the perfect experience for the perfect individual self.
And building a new relation to yourself. It's what it's all about.
To that self, to that sense of self, as opposed to denying a sense of self altogether, as we've mentioned with the ego. I would ask you finally to wrap up, Magnus. I mean, what's been the particular challenges you've had with meditation, as you've done it for so many years now? I mean, I'd say, where are you? Towards 50, so you've done it for like the best part of your life, right? What are your highs and lows, as it were, on this journey?
In the beginning, I was almost like I came from a quite not so nice start. I wasn't felt very healthy. So at first I totally fell in love with meditation, and I felt it was clicking with me. It worked on me very well. and I can't say exactly, but I think I think it was something that I was in this context of getting introduced to Tibetan culture, and I got almost like high on all these things, and very, very interested. And since I'm an ADHD, I intensified my attention towards one thing. So I mean, I went back and forth to Nepal so many times, but I didn't even try a simple yoga posture asana. I was just wanted to go to the meditative aspect of it. But definitely in the beginning, it was to stay focused. Because I mean that's in the nature of ADHD, that distraction is really there all the time. So it took me out and back to meditation. But I read early on an instruction that this is part of the meditation. It actually is the first step of the shamatha, to understand that your mind is cluttery, and to be very self-compassionate about that, and try to stay at one point with your focus, and you lose your attention. And you go away to cognitive processes and then bring it back again. Like you're teaching a small kid or a dog to do something, but with gentle hand all the time. So that was, and then also I had a lot of, also part of my ADHD, I think, but I had a lot of bodily sensations that was really tough for me. I had a lot of, you call tics. So I had this like impulses in my body that I moved my body in small ways, and still that actually is that is actually still. I thought about that the other week. What are my obstacles? And thoughts and emotions is not an obstacle in meditation any longer, but the bodily sensations is actually more of a problem for me sometimes. And I can, and that's also, I think, why yoga asana has been so useful for me, because I can work on the body on subtle layers in a very natural way, which helps me with that. But still, that's the part of this diagnosis, and especially nighttime, I can still have quite hard times with it. But but on the other hand, the highs is, I think we talked about that last time, but you know, my youngest daughter is born with a rare diagnosis called golden heart, with this series of problem issues, bodily issues, all from deafness and sight problems, and her spine is very problematic. But she did 25 surgeries during her first 10 years, and that was actually, it was a very tough period. But in terms of meditation, that was when I become adult in meditation, or I really felt like that now I'm grown up to take my responsibility, because I could really use the exercises off the mat and handle that situation much better than I would do without meditation. So that is also, I want something to say. The retreat is in life. It's going on all the time. You're not going to retreat just for one weekend and perform meditation. The retreat is in those situations. So just like when Buddha went outside castle and saw this old, sick and dead person, I also faced a very big problem in my life, actually. And it's still there. And I can't take it away. And I love my daughter. But it's it's been a lot of suffering there. But I could handle it, at least, quite okay, and that's good enough for me.
Oh, that's a beautiful place to end the interview, and thank you for speaking so candidly and honestly about your experiences as well. If anyone wants to pursue this further, Magnus will be linked in the write-up, and his book as well, which I again recommend you reading. It's a really, really great book. So all that remains is for me to thank you, Magnus, for your time and for coming on, and another wonderful chat with you, which is, funnily enough, me and Magnus have kind of become friends.
No,
we've not met.
Someday we will meet.
We're very much a kindred spirits, and yes, we will meet. We absolutely will meet. But we've become, nicely connected online on the online format. So it's been a wonderful plus.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your great work. I'm enjoying following you, whatever you're doing.